Hello.
Hello.
Hello, this is Christine Weymouth from Austin.
Hey, Christine, this is Terry Whipple from Juneau County.
Oh.
And Barb
Hi.
Sykes is here too. All the Juneau County people are here.
Notice how we're so prompt.
I know. We do exactly what we've been told.
We're very
Ben Williams
compliant.
from FCI, and I appreciate that you guys are so prompt in our online. It looks like we have about 8 or 9 folks on so far, and so I'll wait just maybe another minute or two, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that we go to GoToMeeting also?
I have a presentation that I'll be kind of walking through, and so if possible, that'd be great. If not, I can send out a copy of the PowerPoint so you can follow along that way.
No, I can try. It's just still spinning, and I don't know why, but we'll keep trying to get at it here.
Okay.
Ben, this is Lisa Curlis from Adams County, and I do have to, unfortunately, since we scheduled this, I have a doctor's appointment I have to leave for around 11:20, 11:30. So,
okay.
Sorry.
No, thank you for letting me know, and that is totally fine. I know that this time did not work for everyone. What we'll be doing is actually recording the session,
okay,
so that for anyone that has to step out or misses it, that they'll have a chance to check in. And again, this is kind of the introduction to help us get prepped for the next one. So
okay,
thank you for letting me know. All right, well, it is a little after 11, and I, like the folks from Juneau County, am a prompt person. I want to start on time, and so I will get us started now, and we'll be doing a check-in first. We always start with what's the mission and vision, what do we have in mind. Again, this is for the Central Wisconsin Health Partnership, not necessarily the full summit, but just as a focusing part for beginning our conversation. I have a relatively packed agenda, and so I tend to speak very quickly when I'm talking about things I'm excited about, and this is definitely one of those. So slow me down, tell me to stop. This will generally be a conversation amongst us about it, but I'll start with some talking about kind of what are we looking to do, what could the role of facilitator be, introducing the World Cafe, which is a fancy way of having conversation in small groups. We'll review the kind of the process and timeline. I sent out yesterday around noon or so, basically like a script for how to kind of walk through the sessions. But and so we'll kind of walk through that a little bit in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about the introductory questions for how are we kicking off this conversation. What are we really looking to do, and then for any checkout and next steps, just as follow up as we lead into the live meeting that we'll be having in 2 weeks. And so we always like to start with a check-in question, and I think this kind of relates to what we're hoping to achieve at this conference in the session. So thinking back to the last time you had a spirited and engaging conversation, it could be with friends, coworkers, family, and focus on that atmosphere and the mood for that conversation. You know, what did it feel like to be having that conversation, and what contributed to making that conversation possible? So if anyone is outgoing and wants to share first, or if you want to take a moment or two to think about it, what were the conditions that helped have that conversation that was really, where you felt really locked in and engaged?
Well, I don't mind starting. This is Jessica Beckendorf with Wapaka County UW Extension. The reason I don't mind starting right away is that it's still fresh in my mind because I just had it about an hour ago.
Perfect.
Yeah, the atmosphere and mood and what it felt like was really, it felt like we were both equals and completely equally exchanging. And what contributed to make the conversation possible, I think, was both of our, we had different opinions, but we were both open to sharing our opinions and open to hearing the opinion of the other person, and truly open, where we weren't just waiting to like pounce on something they were saying. So it was a really great conversation.
That's great, and that's active listening, where you're really listening to understand what the person is saying, not pausing and waiting for your chance to rebut with what you're thinking. That's a great example. Thank you, Jessica.
Right, thanks.
This is Lisa Carlos. I would say that it's focused and on topic, helps keep people engaged, not having a lot of sidebars or going off of your intended topic.
Great. I think that really is important too, is making sure people are in one conversation per group and it's not multiple ones where each is going on in different places.
This is Christine Weymouth from Boston, and I would say where everyone in the group or the small group is, or large group, is engaged, everyone speaks.
Good. And how did that come about? What were the conditions that kind of create that space for people to feel that comfortable?
Well, this is also Christine. What I was going to say earlier was, but then the first person sort of said it, was, I think, an element of emotional trust that somehow was established. And I'm sure all of us have been in groups where you either know the people for a long period of time, and so that's been established over time, or somehow the stage was set for it if not all the people were immediately familiar with each other.
Good. And I think that's a great point, that trust, to really be able to extend your point of view and share without feeling like you'll be attacked.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Is there any other things that come to mind as you're thinking about conversations and what really helped? Well, I'll leave it at that for now, but this is really that tone and conversation. Our role as facilitators is really to bring that space to the sessions and conversations we'll be having in little over a month from now. And so my goals for today and kind of our next steps, that pathway forward, today I hope that we can establish a solid understanding of kind of what we're doing, what it'll look like, and how we can set the stage for it, so that at our live meeting we can leave with an affirmation of what our role is going to be as facilitators, cover any questions or concerns. I often find for me that usually at like 3 or 4 a.m. in the next day I'll realize, oh, these are 5 other questions that I didn't think of in the moment. And so this live meeting is in part to help kind of cover any of those last things, as well as walking through the session and kind of like a practice of kind of going through it, and also to get to know each other. I know the last time that we had a conference call, I think it was maybe a few weeks ago, we realized most of us haven't even met each other yet. And so I think the live meeting will be a way to kind of connect with one another as well. And then for the summit, I think it will be a wonderful success if we can host 12 conversations that really engage the participants as active contributors, generating some insights and build momentum for the follow-on work. So what are we doing, taking this to move forward? And these conversations isn't really the end of that step. The summit is really just the beginning as we move forward.
This is Terry Whipple. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I got a question because, I was under the idea that we'd be facilitating a panel. That's not going to be the...
Wait a minute. That should be muted.
And so instead we'll be facilitating for a room full of people that are having a discussion.
Mind if I start off?
Yep. Terry, I think that's a great question, and I think you're right. It's going to, depending on the size and number of people in the room, you're kind of a host, and so we'll be talking a little bit about what that looks like. There'll be actually some small breakout questions. So I want to walk through a little bit of how the World Cafe could work.
Okay.
And then I want to circle back to that question to make sure we have a good sense of what that could be.
Okay.
So a lot of what some of the kind of for people that like the conceptual background for where these ideas are coming from is a way of practice called art of hosting. And there's a sense of several kind of assumptions that underlie that, but this is generally around how do we find ways to generate new insights, because we realize that the challenges we're facing require a different way of acting. And I think another belief or assumption is that these solutions and ideas come out of something that's between chaos and order. And some of these things get to be kind of on the far end of kind of weirdly conceptual, but the idea is that new thinking needs to take from what already exists, kind of the order, but to just be new, it has to be somewhat different, and that's kind of the chaos side. Oftentimes people might be on a spectrum of very rigid and organized on one end to completely chaotic and somewhere, way out there. I tend to be more on the order side of things. And so at first, I think this type of conversation where there isn't really an agenda set in advance can be a little bit challenging, but it really works tremendously well. The big point, and I think what's important for us, is it's that those conversations that we have with one another that can lead to the actions that we need to take. I think I'm born and raised in Wisconsin, and I think a strong Midwest ethic is that we need to get to work and start acting and moving and charging ahead. And I think that the part of this is to take a pause and look at the bigger picture and how do we look at challenges and opportunities a bit differently. And that's where those paradoxes come in between reflecting on what's worked in the past or what's not, and how do we move forward? How do we lead and follow? How do we bring in commonality and differences? I think several of you mentioned that sense of being equal and being able to share when your opinions may differ, and how do we create the space for that? And that's really what the art of hosting is about. And so our roles as facilitators, this is a little bit different than sessions where you may be there to help educate or teach. This is really around hosting. And so these are some quotes from Margaret Wheatley, who's a great writer and thinker about leadership. And I think they kind of get to the essence of what our roles will be at the Summit Day. And that's really to be stewards of other people's ideas and creativity, to bring in that diversity of different viewpoints. And I think a belief there is that we all have a different and unique perspective. And so how do we create the space for there to be many voices that are sharing as opposed to just one or two? And then that last one, again, is our role as a leader here is not to tell people what the response should be, but to gather the space so that as a whole we can really develop. So getting into the kind of brass tacks, I think there's a little bit of feedback that I'm hearing here. I'm wondering if we could all mute our phones unless we want to chime in.
It's a lot of feedback.
I'm just going to try muting the line and see if that helps here.
Somebody has an open mic.
Yeah, does that sound better now? I think I've muted folks.
That's better.
Okay. So if you have a question, just unmute your phone or type in the chat and just say hey, and we can kind of facilitate it that way, and then we can unmute it just to make sure everyone's doing well. But the way that we're going to look at kind of hosting this is called a World Cafe, and the model comes from a perspective of the best conversations are those that have a small enough group where everyone can be participating and listening. And that typically happens best around 4 to 6 people at each table. And so as we set up the design for these sessions that we'll be having in the morning and in the afternoon, We're going to be targeting about that number. And then there's going to be 3 rounds of conversation to help kind of generate and move through there. And with a harvest, which is kind of a way of like shouting out what were the findings from each table at the end. What's a little bit unique about it is that between each round of conversation, everyone except for a table host will be moving to a different table. So you may sit at table 1 at the beginning. For the second round, you'll be at table 4. The third round, you'll be at table 6. And the reason that you do that is to kind of mix up who you're having these conversations with so that those ideas can kind of cross-pollinate and move around, and it brings more creativity to the room. But the linchpin of this is really the table hosts who will be taking notes and kind of relaying what the conversations were between sessions and really be there to help kind of gather the ideas that are being discussed in each of those sessions. And so to help do that, the tables are covered in writing paper, usually like butcher block paper. There's pens, markers, art, doodads, most importantly chocolate. Some of that's because I'm a chocolate lover, but I feel it works best when ideas come when there's a ability to have some sugar to kind of energize the conversation. And so this is generally kind of the design of the room that will be there. And so as a facilitator, our role is to help create the space for all this to happen. And the way that we'll do that is really around how do we energize the conversation to start and then make sure that it can move through each of those steps. And so that script that I sent out gives a good sense of kind of what that looks like. And so I'll hop to this before going back a second. And so as we look at the sessions, there's kind of an introduction to build that interest and context and posing kind of what is it that we're here to talk about. And then that script kind of walks through a little bit of the World Cafe model and table hosts. And so that's kind of to help you all. You can almost use that as just like a way to walk through it. We'll also have white papers that describe the rules. And that takes about 10 minutes. And then for each round of question conversation, they'll be about 10 to 12 minutes long, which kind of incorporates the time to move from one table to another. And then at the end, there'll be a harvest where it's kind of shouting out. Each of the table hosts are sharing what were those big ahas that they had. And I think just some etiquette and rules for this. And this gets back to the question that we had at the beginning of the session around what helps make those conversations happen. And so these are some of the etiquette rules that they have. And I'll be sure to add some of the things that we've talked about here, but focusing on what matters, listening to understand, so make sure you're really hearing what the other people are saying and not waiting to contribute yourself. Being sure to step up. Some people are very outgoing and will be willing to share and share and share and share. Others are much more passive or introspective, and so it's kind of a balance of knowing when to step up and when to step back to make sure that conversation happens. Speaking your mind and heart, really sharing from both what you think and also what you're feeling. As you move from conversation to conversation, you can link and connect those ideas and listen for those themes and insights, and that can sometimes really find new ways to look at those challenges. And so that's kind of the model of a World Cafe as we walk through it. And so I've been talking now for a little while. I want to pause. Are there any questions that people have as they kind of hear this introduction?
Muted.
Doing pretty good?
Unmuted.
Doing pretty good? Okay, I'm going to step forward then. I'll remute the lines. And so again, raise your hands or chat if there's a question. So our roles as facilitators, and this kind of gets back to Terry's question, is what are we going to be doing in the day? And I think there's 4 key parts. One is setting that stage. And your introduction is really the spark of energy to begin those conversations. And so we'll talk a little bit about what can we bring to it. I think Patrick and his team at UW Extension is doing some great work around bringing some data and understanding. So it might be just calling out what you see or those highlights to kind of frame the conversation. I think hosting it, making sure people are engaged. And so as everyone at these different tables is going through and having their conversations, just kind of walking around and making sure everyone's feeling comfortable, they understand what's going on. I think one thing that often can derail these types of conversations, which are kind of decentralized, is making sure that the time keeps moving. And so what we'll often do is have a timer and like a chime or some sort of instrument to like get everyone's attention, like, okay, you've loved this first part of the conversation, but now we got to pause and move to the next one. I think that's always a bit of a challenge. And then the last one, and this is, I think, the most important for helping bring the information out for others, is making sure that table hosts have been able to kind of really take down those notes and gather those insights. And I think that last 20 minutes where it's the table host sharing what they heard from their conversations is where everyone really gets highly engaged and think thoughtful about what's going on and what's happening next. And so these are some sample questions here of what that cafe could look like. And these are taken from the Art of Hosting model and some experience that we've had at Forward Community Investments around theming, around something that's kind of broad, but we want to delve into more detail for next steps. And so often we'll start with, you know, what's possible here and who cares? So what is it? What's the potential around the area? And then who cares about it? And so if the theme is a county, it could be what's possible in this county to really make it great or successful, or strategies that can move it forward. And that's really where the theme would be, that initial question, which we'll get to next. And so that would be the first round. So that'd be like the 12-minute period would kind of be covering what's that possibility. And then we'd say, okay, take a pause. Everyone, except for the table host, stand up, move around to a different table with some new people, and talk about what exists that could make it happen, what is missing. And so it may feel a little bit funky for the second. Usually the table host will give a shout out for a minute or two of what was their conversation like from the previous minutes for the new people at the table. And then that conversation will really delve in. And I think a lot of times you'll see that there's some common themes that are discussed at each table from conversation to conversation. And as we aggregate the information at the end, I think that's what really will start to bubble up. And so the second question is, what exists that could make it happen? And what is missing? And so what are those assets or things that we have available now that could help us make some change? Or what is missing in terms of making it there? And so that's kind of the what's there to most. And then the last conversation, the third, what is most needed to affect change? This is kind of the action steps. So what can we do now? What are those things that can charge us and move us forward? And then at the very end, that last 20 minutes, and it's twice the amount of time usually because we want to make sure we give some attention to it, or having each of the table hosts maybe share what are their top 3 ahas or ideas or reflections. And then depending on the size of the room, that'll probably be the end of the space that we have for each session. If there is some time as a facilitator, you can kind of dig in a little bit more, or otherwise that's kind of generally where we're at. And so this is kind of the general model for how we could have the conversation flow for the day. And so are there any questions about how this looks, or reactions as they see, how do you feel about this? Does it fit for what you're doing? We'll delve into each of the county and then the issue area sections next, but I want to just check in and see, like, as a way of moving forward, does this kind of make sense or is clear? Yeah, okay. I muted all the lines. So if that probably prevented anyone from speaking before if they'd wanted to. I apologize. So, are there any questions as we look at this kind of model, or how are people feeling?
So, what are the plans for recording the conversation, or the bullet points of the conversation?
So taking what happens in the conversation and moving it forward?
Well, this is taking place at a number of different tables, and if there's only 2 or 1 or 2 facilitators in the room, they obviously won't be doing the recording of the conversation or the note-taking. Is there plans for how that will be accomplished, or we just haven't gotten to that part of the program? No,
that's the table host's role. And so as we look at each of these steps, one of the most important things is, so let's say there's 30 people in a room, there'd probably be 5 or 6 tables. And so at each table, there'll be a host who's kind of volunteering to be the note taker and kind of carry on the conversation from round to round. And so during the first round and that question, that table host will be kind of documenting what's there. Usually as other people are moving from table to table, they'll kind of be documenting what are like the top 2 or 3 things that really happened at that first conversation. And then they'll share those out as kind of the segue into the second question for the new people that'll be at their table. And so that table host will stay for each one of those rounds. And then at the harvest, the table host is the one that really shares out those things. And so the table host will actually be doing the feedback. I think the reason this, or the benefit of this type of model is it helps really get, so if there's a room of 30, at any given time you'll have, 5 or 6 different whole sets of ideas and thoughts that may be related. They may have some unique differences that can really help bring it forward. And so it's that table host kind of role, and they'll have note paper and flip charts and to be able to kind of take those things forward. So are the hosts predetermined individuals? No. So that's as part of the I think one of the first things, and this is kind of in this, this is in the script a bit, but what you ask for is a volunteer. And so usually people will say, yeah, I'm willing to stay at this table and be the note taker. And so one thing before you get started in jumping into what's the first question is to really make sure those table hosts are all set. It sounds really crazy now that, like, or not crazy, but a little bit for me, I like to know exactly what's going on steps A through Z, and so it's a little bit nerve-wracking to think about that now, but typically it goes very, very smoothly, and there'll be volunteers. The note-taking quality of each person may vary a little bit, but in general, we found it pretty good, especially when you kind of reinforce, okay, what were the top 3 things that came out of the first round, and then dismiss that table, and then they can kind of move around, okay, then the second one, and that helps kind of move it forward. Are there other questions about kind of this general process or roles for how it would work? And I can give you some examples from our experience. We did this as we were changing our mission and vision. We had these community conversations throughout the state, and I can send you some examples of kind of what bubbled up from that, if that's helpful for people to see, like what comes out of it.
This is Terry Whipple. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this happens in the different breakout sessions where the theme is workforce development and education or industry and business development. Is that correct?
Yep. So this could happen. This could be in the morning. So one question I'd have is if it's the same. If we want to have the same questions in the counties in the morning as the issues in the afternoon. So I have an alternative set of questions we could ask for the counties if we didn't like it. But in general, whatever the theme is, I think using these 3 questions can work. I think the role of us as facilitators would be setting the stage. So what is it about workforce development or education, like giving them some kind of energy and like pushing the ball up. Like, so what are we thinking about here? And then their first reaction is, well, what's possible around workforce development? What could we be doing, or what could happen there? And who cares about it? And so that's kind of how it would flow.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Andrew Kunkel. I would be in favor of. I think these 3 general, questions, the flow of it and how it goes, as you explained, Ben, it works well for both the morning county breakouts and for the topic breakouts in the afternoon. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
I think it also helps for, as a participant, as they go through it the first time, I think they'll get it. But then if they're doing the same thing in the afternoon, it'll really click for them. So it'll make it even easier at that second time. Nick posted a question. How closely? So that script that I gave is literally writing out almost per word what you could say. I would say take that, mold it to fit how like the way you'd like to speak to it or talk about it. And so, I don't feel like you have to. I think it was more just to give that space for people to think about it. I think in general, that would be the type of way to go. But we can talk about adjusting it to make it fit for you. Are there other questions in general about the kind of the cafe model and how it would look? I think one of the great, the powerful aspect of this is it really, people as participants aren't listeners. They're really active and engaged in what's happening, and so it's a fun shift to be a part of this, to really take in, and especially as part of our goal is to look at how do we engage folks around these issues and areas. I think this is a great way to start. So in the afternoon, there's the 6 issues, and so I want to talk a little bit about the context for teeing up the session, so that first 10 minutes or so. And so for the counties, the question that we had from before was, what are the greatest needs in your counties and what strategies can be identified to address them? That was kind of on the agenda as the focusing question for presenting things, and then I think we would kind of flow from there. As for the county facilitators, I think what you can add to that conversation is kind of talking about either what's been going on a little, or you can kind of just talk about from the data, like what do you see? And so then people kind of have some ideas or things kind of bubbling in their minds, and then the conversation can move forward. In the afternoon, I think many of you submitted some examples, and so I kind of wanted to walk through what we had set up for each of those conversations, and this would kind of be like, this would almost be what you would walk through as a facilitator to introduce the issue conversations. And so for community and family development, there was a paragraph that kind of talks about the issue a little bit, and then the question that kind of leads into the conversation is, how can we better support stability and growth for our families and communities? And so if you want, we can talk about this now and say, does that question connect and make sense for bringing forward the type of discussions you'd like to have at your tables? Or this could be a takeaway maybe to bring into the live sessions, or if you're not able to participate in the live sessions, just to share with the team between now. But those questions we have for each of those sessions on like, what is it that we're hoping that the conversation kind of moves around? This is kind of the debate question. And so for workforce development is, how can we connect our current and future workforce with the tools, skills, and information to be successful? And so we've been moving pretty quickly, which is great. So my goal for today was really to kind of take a look at those questions by issue, and then just make sure that there weren't any other next steps. So if we feel good, are there any, you think now is a good time to comment on that, or do you want to just kind of marinate a little bit around what was the question that I want to have to kind of kick off my conversation?
Well, this is Andrew from the Workforce Development and Education group, and I think I'm the only one still involved in the meeting. I know Lisa had to leave early, and we were planning on trying to get together the next couple of weeks to maybe try and talk about this very thing. So I think for me, it's just best to wait to connect with them on that. Okay, great. And so I think, yeah, I think from what we've already got put together, I think a lot of this is really strong. And so it's kind of just to set the tone for the conversation. So, like, what is the issue? What are we here to talk about? And then you kind of let the participants who are obviously interested in that topic because they're at your session kind of lead forward and move into it. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are connecting. And then if you do have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the team or for feedback if other things come up. But I think the live session that we'll have in 2 weeks will be another time where we can kind of reconvene after we've thought about it a little, just to make sure it makes sense.
Is your PowerPoint available to us?
Yeah, so what I'll be doing today, I'll send out this PowerPoint and just some of the notes from what we've talked about so far later this afternoon, along with the recording. And so we'll have all of this together, and if there's edits that we want to make, I'd just make sure that we coordinate them probably with, I'll send instructions in the email for coordinating the follow-up just to make sure that we edit it. But I think what we put here was our best draft thinking at that time, and so we can tweak anything here if, as you consider it, and now that you have a sense of the conversation, what we're doing. So maybe now probably isn't the easiest time to edit and focus on those. So from my perspective, the next steps, one, I think we all signed up for being facilitators here without the clearest sense of what it is that we'll actually be doing. So now that we do have that sense, I want to make sure everyone feels comfortable with these roles. And if you don't, it is completely fine to say, you know, this isn't quite what I was thinking. I'm not sure how I feel about it. And so we want to make sure you have that option to consider about it. So you don't have to say so on the phone now, but if you have any concerns at all, we want to make sure that you feel ready. These conversations are really fun to be a part of. I think the hardest thing as a facilitator is to avoid trying to jump in and sit at one of the tables and chime in, because these are obviously things that we care about a lot. But I think you especially from the follow-up and afterwards, I think your experience and knowledge around these issues will really help to kind of editorialize or maybe provide more context as we move forward. And then as we move to the live session, you know, after today, you'll probably have a couple other questions around, you know, what do we have, you know, what am I thinking here? Can I edit this? What will help me be successful? But our goal on that live session will really be to cover those things. So if those ideas or questions come up, be sure to reach out to us now so we can be kind of prepped for it, because I'm sure if you have one question, several others will probably have that same.
I have a question about the process. This is Jessica with Waupaca County. Did any of you go to the Chicago Fed's Healthy Rural Communities Summit in Platteville a couple weeks ago?
Yes, I was there. And I'm not sure if Sarah's on the phone, but I think she was too. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yep. Someone. Okay. So I really loved how they wrapped up the day, and I don't know that we'd want to process quite that long, but I really loved that last kind of, okay, so we've talked about all these possibilities, but what is one thing that we could implement that would have a big effect both on, you know, health and community? Did you guys stay for till the end for that?
Yeah, and that was a fun. So just for context for those that were there, at the last hour of the conference was really focused on coming up with some ideas for what can be done. And then there was a voting exercise to kind of look at themes. And then from there, they kind of highlighted some of those that really stepped up, and there was a conversation at the end. And I think it did bring a lot of energy. And so some of the themes that came up were infrastructure, others were around improving local business development.
Yeah, I thought that I was really surprised that like the top 3 or something were broadband, statewide broadband.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. But is that, I mean, I thought that was a really good way to end a day. Is that something that we have any kind of time to do? Not that we'd want to, like I said, a process that long I think would be too much, but.
You know, one thing, and I talked with Sarah about this a little bit before, and at some other conferences, they sometimes have something called like a learning wall, where they put ideas, feedback, and thoughts. And so one idea that we could do is have almost like 12 little sections, one for each of the counties and one for each of the issues. And then maybe, you know, particularly because there'll be time between the county conversation and then the issue conversation, more than it, you know, have to double check on the agenda. But I think there's some ways to kind of highlight what were the top things that came up in each one, and then maybe as participants we can come up with like a voting exercise or something that people can do to put like stars or stickies or thumbs up at the ideas that really resonate with them, as a way of kind of like a checkout as you're leaving the conference. And also if you wanted to see what other conversations we're talking about, that would be a way to kind of bring that forward.
This is Sarah. I really kind of like that idea, because I know, you know, some of us are facilitating, or certainly there are people who are participating who maybe cover multiple counties and can't be in all the places at once, but maybe want to weigh in, or they're interested in multiple issues, and this is a way for them to kind of check in with what that other group did besides the brief reporting out and stuff. And I also think what I hope that we're able to translate in some of those closing remarks is, and which I think wasn't, I think the ending activity for the Federal Reserve piece was good, but they really left it up to the individual to kind of say, oh, well, now you move this forward. And we have, and I guess I'm not sure who I should identify as the we other than the Central Wisconsin Health Partnership at this point, are the folks who've committed to carrying what the products of the summit are forward into with some momentum. So I think the activity was great, but I also felt like it did fall a little flat. And the only reason I say that is because people were really energized, but then they were left to their own devices.
I thought it was a great unifying exercise, taking the economic development and health, and looking at all those things that we agreed and ranked as, when I say we, I mean, I guess I would be coming at it more from like the economic development side. That's where my background is. And I felt like it was a really great unifying exercise, even if it's sort of a, okay, now you figure it out. Yeah, I really, for me, it was energizing because I thought, oh, wow, we really care about the same things.
Yeah, and that's the part I think we want to get to, and I absolutely agree with you, but I also want people who maybe, because I've certainly encountered this even as I'm putting this forward to folks to even register, they're a little bit skeptical because they're like, oh, I've been to something like this before and nothing ever comes of it, or it peters out. And so what I want to make sure is that we have that activity, but it's also very clear as we're closing that there are opportunities. You should be engaging now. We'll be engaging you later, which Ben and Robin have been talking about for the evaluation piece. And then there is a point group that will be leading this forward for the 6 counties, and an opportunity for more people to be involved and to commit to that, so that people aren't, we're not losing folks, right? They're going, oh, this is great. I mean, I will tell you, I thought it was great and unifying, but I also went, oh, everybody picked Wi-Fi. That's like a huge, maybe not a low-hanging fruit kind of thing. Like, what's a small step for that? So I also,
I guess, and I suppose it just depends on who's listening to it. Because to me, I thought, okay, we have some great, we have a great reason now to start, lobbying the right people and I don't know. I guess.
I think you're both.
Excuse me. This is. Oh.
No, please go on.
All right. Well, this is Dyson. I guess in listening to, I kind of get where both of you guys are going at, and I'm wondering about, I love the idea at the end to make a commitment that there are going to be a group of people that will make sure that this year moves forward, and the ideas and the investment that they have provided by sharing their ideas with us. Yeah. But then maybe we should also have in the evaluation an opportunity for them as a next step to say, yes, I'd like to commit by just being updated. I'd like to commit by being on a work group. This is the topic I'm most interested in. To give them initially something so that these are the people that we know we could contact, and they're making their commitment today to work in the future on it.
Good idea.
Barb, I love that idea. I feel like you read my email because I sent something similar over to Sarah, and I think that's exactly what we're hoping to do. Is so at the end of the session, if there's like a learning wall or like whatever the findings are, and that momentum and energy, and I think, Jessica, to your point, I think we'll find that people that come from community development, economic development, health, the business community will be surprised at how interrelated everyone's interests are. I think that's going to be kind of that was one of my big takeaways from the session in Platteville, and I think that'll be
mine
the same
too.
Here. And so I think then the step is, so how do we move forward? And I think the group that Sarah is talking about will really be to kind of how do we take this information and kind of use those ideas, whatever they be, to help create a kind of organizing agenda for what can be done. And so that next steps, part of the end of the day will be, do you want to participate on that? Do you like being an organizer, and that's more kind of thinking of the vision, the mission, what are those goals? Do you want to be involved as an actor, like, okay, once you're starting to get to work on something, I'll talk to me then. Or if you want to be just kind of like a cheerleader on the side or a supporter, there's a lot of different ways to fit in. And so I think we're trying to create that space so that people leave excited, but then there's also that pathway to making action happen. And so I think we can manage to do all of those things in a pretty smooth way. But I think that's a great thing to bring up about how do we tie it together, kind of, at the end. I think, and so some ideas on that, and we can make sure there's some intentional space to make sure that happens.
Agreed.
Are there other questions or things on your mind as we've been talking now for a little while, or are things kind of coming to your mind, or questions?
Who is going to be facilitating the county's discussions?
I believe that was a number of folks from the different extension offices.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that.
And so I think, and then Patrick and his team have been doing some work to kind of bring some context and data, which I think will be super helpful for the work afterwards, but I think will also be kind of an interesting thing to maybe help people as they're having their conversations to kind of reference some new information that might be a surprise to them. I think that can help really deepen the conversations that we have in these sessions.
This is Kathy from Green Lake County. Sarah, I'm just wondering if we could get a list of who has already signed on so then we can target some of the folks that have not registered yet.
I can ask Emily that today. She and I are going to try to connect sometime this week.
Okay.
I will tell you, well, did everybody get an email from her with the registration numbers today?
Right, that there was only 30, that's why
I honestly have not done a big push at all, so I was just gearing up my emails. I just sent the counties association to make sure they do it, because they can do a targeted invite to the supervisors of our 6 counties, and all of that stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of pushing that I haven't done yet. And I feel like I might hold a lot of those emails.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so if things could, I'm working on it. My kids are gone this week, so I'll get lots done. But I will ask Emily.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions now, the next meeting will be live at the Neshkoro Community Center. And so we'll send out some reminders about that. I'll send up follow-up from today along with the recording so that everyone that wasn't able to participate or stay on can have it. And then I think the big next steps for us is just to kind of consider, depending on what session we're at, you know, just how are we going to kind of create that space or introduction to the issue or topic. But I'm really excited for it. I think these are really powerful conversations, and it's about issues that people care about. And so I think it's always one of those super energizing things, and I think this is going to be a great way to really help move things forward. So I want to thank you all for volunteering your time to really help make this happen.
Ben, are we going to do a dry run then at the Neshkoro Area Community Center? Yeah,
we'll do one. It'll be an abbreviated dry run, but that way you can kind of get a feel for it, what works well, just so you can kind of get loose, especially with talking through introducing the World Cafe and then what we're doing. I think that'll be really helpful.
Wonderful.
And again, that script has kind of like a way to walk through it. You know, change the language to fit how you would talk. It's basically in my voice, which is good for me, but not as good for other people. So please take that and edit it however you see fit.
This is Christine Weymouth from Boston. I'm just wondering where the Neshkoro Center is.
I would not be able to tell you where it is from anywhere else, but we can send out a link to the address for that as well.
So, I mean, what town is it in?
It's in Neshkoro, Wisconsin.
And it's off on the east side of Highway 22 going north towards Watoma,
on the
corner of Main and State. It's the corner of Main and
town.
State in Manishkoro.
Okay.
Manishkoro's in Marquette County.
Okay,
Yeah.
if someone could just send directions, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
It's a little town, and it's real easy to find. It's an old school that used to operate as an elementary school. It's a small town, and it's the only school-like looking building there. So, Main and State.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you again so much for your time. If you have other questions, concerns, send an email or give us a ring, and we can go from there. And I'm really excited. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.